Imagine that each morning when you wake up, you're smiling and looking forward to your day, knowing that you're happy even while dealing with grief and loss. The Grief and Happiness podcast inspires, comforts, and supports you with each new episode. For more support, check out the Grief and Happiness Handbook and cards. I welcome you to listen to this podcast and discover endless possibilities for your life. Aloha. I am so excited today to have a very special guest, Nicole Junkerman. And did I pronounce that correctly?
You did.
Oh, good. I should have asked you before we started and I forgot. I found Nicole on LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn is just a wealth of interesting people and interesting stories. And I am really grateful that I happened to run across you because I really liked your story, that where you've come from and where it's led you to. And the book that you wrote, I really like that a lot, having been in a position where I wish I would have had a book like that for my kids at the time when it was needed. I haven't seen anything else like what you wrote out there. I think it's really great.
Thank you. I haven't seen anything else like it either so far.
Yeah, you really filled a need. So tell us about you.
I am a retired police officer. I was forced to medically retire. Unfortunately, I broke my neck on the job. 3 spinal surgeries later, and I am a much better person than I was when it initially happened. Physically, mentally, emotionally, all of the above, much better. In the process of not being a police officer anymore, I didn't realize it at the time, but the stars aligned and I got to spend every day with my grandfather for the last year of his life.
Oh, wow.
While tragic, I wouldn't change anything. There's a lot of things that I would do to be back on the road, to still be a police officer. That's all what I always wanted to do. I absolutely loved it. That's not something that I would give up to be back on the road, though. That was definitely a very special, sacred time that I cherish having had with him. And ironically enough, the same week that he was passing, I was cleared to get another job. Obviously not anything like a police officer, something like a sedentary job somewhere. And I'm at the cemetery with my grandmother, and the cemeterian goes, "So is there anything else that we can help you with?" We were wrapping everything up and felt like somebody smacked me on the back of the head. And totally inappropriate time, I know, but it just kind of came out. I was like, "Well, yeah, as a matter of fact, are you guys hiring?" His face was priceless. And he's like, "Well, we are." Maybe we take care of this first and then we can address that. And I was like, "Yeah, you're probably right." A week later, I started working at the cemetery. At that point, I thought it was just going to be to help catch up with bills again and those type of things. A little more food on the table, everything not generic, "Oh, you want the gummies when you take the kids to the grocery store and you get those too." But I loved it. And if anybody had told me that I would be doing that and loving it, I'd be like, "You're crazy." But I did. I absolutely loved it. I was there for about 2 years when a local funeral home poached me from there. And I went and I worked at the funeral home. Many, many hats. I did life insurance. I was an administrative assistant. I helped them open a new location that I had a very difficult time leaving. That was my baby. You would have thought my name was on the side of the building. And then I even was a funeral director apprentice. While all of that was happening, a friend of mine completed suicide, and I was able to help put him back together for his family to see him for the very last time. And it was one of the best, worst things I could have done. It was very difficult for me emotionally, but satisfying at the same time, if that's the right way to look at it, that I was able to do that. But I struggled immensely. And then I had some personal things that I was struggling with. So I took some time away. And then I was having back surgery, and it was actually my middle school vice principal that I saw, and he looks at me out in public and he says, "You would be a great death doula." And I was like, "What's that?"
Oh, wow.
And he knew me well enough, yes, all these years later, to say, if it's something that you're interested in, look it up. He's like, "But I feel like it's a job that was made for you." Well, it just kept gnawing at the back of my mind. So a couple of days later, I'm Googling death doula, and I was like, "Oh, wow." I had always said I loved the funeral. I don't want to say life. I loved working in that world, but I hated hearing all these wonderful stories about your loved one. And then I would go and embalm them or dress them or whatever. And I'd be thinking about those stories, but I didn't have that connection to the deceased. Whereas as a death doula, you get that connection because you were there for the person that is passing. And since I had just had the back surgery, I was home with nothing to do. So I took an online course and became a certified death doula.
Wow.
Yes. I never saw myself going from police officer to death doula, but that's just kind of the way that my path lined up for obvious reasons, because I thoroughly enjoy it. I'm good at it. I'd like to think I'm good at it, at least. It's very, very rewarding. I never thought that I would have my own business, but my husband kind of pushed me. He's like, you've got it. You're rocking it. Open it. So I opened my own business of positive passing because I want it to be a positive experience for everyone, the person that's passing and the family that's involved, and be there for them for the grief of it. Be there for the person that's passing as their biggest advocate, but yet answering all their questions, and then being there for the family during and after, even that once the person has passed, to still be there for them.
Wow. That is so beautiful. I've often wondered how people get into that particular occupation because they didn't used to be there. People would take, like you did with your grandfather, they would have a one-time opportunity for something special like that.
Right. And I've always said, even in his passing, my grandfather was taking care of me. He always did, was my hero, will always be my hero. He always took care of me growing up. And I said, even in his passing, he was still taking care of me.
Oh, that's so sweet. What a wonderful relationship. Well, I had a look into the world of death doula last year. One of my careers was being a nurse, and it seemed like whenever anybody that I knew were dying or had a family member that had a situation, they'd always call me to come over and help them and tell them what to do and how to do it, or help them do whatever it is that needed to be done. And I felt really good about doing that. I think that's why people kept asking me to do it, because you've got to have a feel for it, a heart for it. And since then, I've gotten into all this, and I took care of family members too, my mom in particular, and then her sister who had the same thing that she had. But then when I had two husbands who both died, when I met my second husband that died, he had no idea that he had a medical challenge, and it ended up that they both died of the same thing. And they both were sick for 2 years before they died and had a lot of similarities. And from all the other caring that I'd done before that, I was able to do my best at being with them those last couple of years. And I appreciated that. But I never thought of actually being a death doula and what that would entail. On the island here on Maui, where I live, there's an organization called Doorway into Light. And they do non-traditional burials. They do different things with ushering people through. We have where you can choose to end your life if you're on your way out anyway. That it's legal here to do that, and there's a specific way to do that. And so they help facilitate that, because if you know all the steps and how to do it, it can be really nice, actually.
It can. Very peaceful, very beautiful.
So the man who runs Doorway into Light contacted me last year, and he said, we're doing this precursor to the death doula training. It's a required with the training that they do. It was a week long. It was in a kind of real rural area on Maui that there was cliffs down to the beach, but you were up on the side of the hill, and there was this gorgeous building that this man had built just to do special things. And so for a week, we went and had all different kinds of training to introduce you to all different kinds of things to consider if you were being a death doula. And it was absolutely incredible. I was so impressed with that. And they're getting ready to do it again this fall. And he contacted me and said, "Do you know anybody you can invite?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I've got about 500 people on my mailing list. I'll invite them." So he was excited. But I just thought, you don't have to become a death doula to learn the beauty of the process and what you can get out of it, what the family can get out of it, what the person who is passing can get out of it.
Exactly. Well, and it sounds like you kind of already were a death doula before even taking the training.
That's actually true. I hadn't thought of it that way before, but I had a lot of experience that was good. I know when Ron, my husband who died here on Maui, we moved here to Maui 2 years before he died because he knew that his days were numbered essentially, and this is where he wanted to be. So we came here, and because I didn't really know Maui that well, we'd been a few times. We kept coming and wondering why we were going back to the mainland. And finally, we just decided we'd stay. So we really spent that last 2 years just together. Sounds kind of like with your grandfather, where you got to spend all that time together. It was amazing. And of course, when he actually transitioned, I had to deal with that. But as I was working my way through that initial grief, I realized that I was really actually happier now than I'd been in most of my life. And I think it's because of I really valuing every moment now.
Yes. It becomes very different. It's like that country song, I believe it's Tim McGraw, Live Like You're Dying, without the thought of dying, like live with intention.
Mm-hmm.
Just make the best out of every day. You know, you've got a crappy day. I'm sorry, it's going to happen, but make the best of it. There's got to be something good in even your crappy days. That's what you need to focus on.
That's so beautiful. I think that's probably the biggest life lesson that you can learn. It truly is life-changing to be able to be that way.
It is.
So I want you to tell me, too, about the book you wrote.
So I wrote a children's book called Daddy's Home. What I didn't tell you is the amount of grief that I went through when I could no longer be a police officer. It was literally a decade before I truly started to heal. It was brutal. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what I was, what I wanted to be, didn't know what I wanted to be when I grow up. And I struggled immensely. I took a grief recovery course where you do a lot of journaling. It was right around the 10th anniversary of my injury. My son was in the police academy getting ready to graduate. So I knew that I had to do some sort of healing for that so that I could be present with him. I could be the supportive parent that he needed me to be. And then we had a line of duty death in our county. I was already struggling with the thought of pinning my son's badge on him to begin with. It was one thing as a mom to go out and do all those crazy things. It was another to pin my son and give him my blessing to go run amok like I know, like his mom did, because God love him. He's more like me than either of us would like to admit. So when we had that officer that was brutally murdered, I started journaling again. And it was 4 days before my son graduated from the police academy. So I actually pinned him with a shrouded badge, which I don't know if you know what that is, but it's the little black band that they put on the badge that symbolizes a fallen officer. So I was struggling immensely. And I started with it just journaling. But the more I started journaling, the more I realized that it could be a children's book and it could potentially help kids. What I didn't realize when I first started it was how cathartic it was going to be for me. A lot of the stuff was things that I had done with my kids, like the beginning of it. And I even talked to my kids about it because if I'm being completely honest, the day that I was injured, a part of me died because I was never a police officer again. I never went back out on the road. So I talked to them about making it mommy's home. And that nerve hit a little too close to home. They're like, no, daddy's home is fine. But if you read the book, the date of the injury or the date of dad not coming home, like the day that they get the notification, was actually the date of my injury. Every name that is in it has significance to me, either an officer that I've lost, some in the line of duty, some naturally. The Chief Banks. Banks was my grandfather's last name. So that's where he wasn't a police officer, but I still had to include him in it somehow. So that's where that name came from. But the most cathartic thing, and I didn't realize it until I did it, was there's a last call in the book. Because a lot of times, if you haven't been to a police funeral, you don't realize the deafening silence of the last call. But I used my ID number for that. So I was able to give myself my last call that I never got because I was forced to medically retire. And I can't tell you how healing that was. I wish that we never needed the book to begin with, but while I hope that it can help other people, mostly children, but I've had adults that have read it that have, oh my goodness, I wish I had had this to kind of prepare myself. It was so healing for me. I was able to finally kind of put down the past when I finished that book.
The book is so beautifully written.
Thank you.
I appreciated it so much reading it. And I love what you're saying about how the writing was so cathartic, essentially, for you.
It was.
I'm big on writing. I encourage people to deal with their grief by writing in lots of different ways. We have our Sunday gatherings where we write about something different every Sunday and then to get to talk to each other about it, which I think is a really nice step with it so that you're not doing it in isolation.
Right. I like that.
It works really well. The people that come, a lot of them have been coming from the beginning, and others come and go when they need it. They'll be there for a while and then gone for a while and then come back when they feel like they want the support and they know that it's there. And I just think writing is a profound gift to people to be able to do self-comforting. And as you did with your book, comforting others.
Yes. And like I said, I wish it was something that wasn't needed, but unfortunately, it's getting to the point that you almost can't turn the news on or any type of social media or anything without finding, if not an officer down, an officer attacked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What a world we live in now.
Yes. Yes. It's sad. And I've had like firefighters ask me, well, will you write one for us or military? And given the right direction, I would, but I knew the police world. So I knew kind of how that one went. And I was able to tie both of my worlds together as a police officer and then as, working in the death industry with the cemetery and the funeral home and all of that. So it kind of tied both of my worlds' professions together nicely.
Yeah, I was thinking about that when I was reading it, actually. I thought, this is brilliant, the way that you were able to do that. It's really a very special book, and I really encourage people to get it and read it. There's love lessons in it that are very special.
Well, I've even encouraged more so locally because I'm able to talk to those officers, face to face, but get it before you need it.
Yes.
And I have encouraged people that are on the road, if you have children or even a spouse, get the book, write them a little note, That way, if the book is ever a necessity, they have something tangible from you. And I actually, when I do presentations, I have an example, because when I was on the road, I had letters. I have 2 children. And when I was on the road, I had letters to both of my kids in case I didn't come home. Not that I want anyone to have to give their child that letter. It would be nice to kind of have the book to go along with it so that they can prepare for what's coming.
That's a good lesson for anybody, because you never know when anybody's not going to come home.
Exactly.
To actually write that letter and have it be, and you can, write it every once in a while, because as the
update it. Absolutely. Yes.
There's so many times I recently, I don't know why recently this has been coming to me, but I didn't talk with my parents a lot. I kind of was raised in that time of children being seen and not heard. And
yes.
So we didn't really talk a lot. And there were so many things. I keep seeing things and thinking, I wish Mom would have told me about that, or I knew more about that about my dad, or that sort of thing. And it's a really special way to communicate.
Absolutely.
Right now, I have a couple bookshelves full of journals that I have filled, and I don't want anybody to have to go through those. I'm thinking I'm going to have a bonfire when it gets close to time for me, so that people won't read all that stuff. But it was so therapeutic for me at the time to write it. But one of the things that I like to do most is writing letters to my loved ones, especially my husbands who aren't physically going to read it. But it's important for me to be able to express things and ask things that I didn't think of when I could have had the conversation.
Yeah, no, I think that's beautiful. Part of my grief recovery program that I did was I wrote a letter to myself as a recruit.
Mm-hmm.
And then through that letter, I went from recruit to police officer, but I ended it to just Nicole, because that's who I am. That in the book is a big part of how I was able to kind of say goodbye.
Yeah. Oh, that's fabulous. There's something about putting your pen to paper or your fingers on the keys that it makes a difference, other than just having the thoughts bouncing around in your head,
Absolutely.
To actually express them makes a huge, huge difference. And I encourage everybody to do that.
Well, once I wrote the letter, I physically read it out loud, and that was huge.
Yeah.
Just kind of putting a voice to it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. I think about celebrations of life sometimes too, when they have people get up and tell stories about whoever it was. And wouldn't it be cool to incorporate in there a letter from that person to the people who are celebrating?
Absolutely. And I, especially now as a doula, I do this even more, where, they're getting ready for the celebration of life. And my thing is, did you ever tell them? Because some people are starting to think about it before the person has ever actually passed. And my biggest thing is, have you told them? Have you shared that particular memory with them? Do they know just how much you think of them? And I don't always, but I try very hard to make sure that my people know that. Know, hey, I saw such and such, and it reminded me of this particular time, and I share that story with them. And I tell them, I'm sure my husband and my kids kind of get tired of the I love you, I'm proud of you things, but I don't ever want them to doubt it or question it. Like you said, tomorrow isn't promised. I could just not wake up in the morning, and that would have nothing to do with somebody's going to deliver the book and the letter because I'm no longer on the road. It's just part of life. But I don't want my husband or my kids especially to question any of that. And that's more of that like purposeful living.
That's so beautiful. What a wonderful conversation this has been. It's felt interesting because I haven't actually picked a lot of people out of LinkedIn. I just happened to see about you and the combination of between the cemeteries and the death doula. I thought there's got to be a good story here. And boy, what a wonderful story it is. I didn't even know about your book at that time. So I'm so glad that you joined me here today for this conversation. And it can change lives.
Well, I greatly appreciate you seeing it and reading it and reaching out to me.
My pleasure. Thank you. And I'll have all the links about Nicole and where you can get her book so you can have your very own copy of it, because I know you'll want to have one. We'll just take to heart a lot of the things that she said. There's a lot of gifts in what she said today. Thank you so much for being here. And to my listeners, I'll be back next week with yet another guest and be happy to see you then too. In the meantime, aloha.
Aloha.
Do you want more comfort and support and happiness? Join the Grief and Happiness Alliance at our free gatherings on Zoom every Sunday. Visit my website at griefandhappiness.com and read my books, The Grief and Happiness Handbook, and get your set of the beautiful Grief and Happiness cards. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast, rate it, review it, and binge listen to all of our episodes. I can't wait to welcome you back to another episode of the Grief and Happiness Podcast.